58 that they had, they found 7 of them had evidence of extensive toxoplasma infection, which is really interesting. So it's kind of getting from the cat poo into the waters and affecting our dolphins.
And we know it's prevalent in New Zealand, as you say. It's a danger to sheep, especially, and apparently feral cats keep it a problem on dairy farms. Just some quick questions. Would you eat rare meat?
Well, so this is the thing where the reporting's been kind of interesting, because so we know that you can have these cysts, and eating those can lead to infection in us. But the question is about, so how many of the animals that we eat have got these cysts, and where are those cysts? Because a lot of the research that I've been looking at, they're looking at, the cysts are in the brains and hearts and things like that. So the question is it in your steak? And what kinds of animals it is. A lot of the stuff showed cattle and sheep. Some of the research said it was more lamb and pork. So yeah, the question is it really your hamburger, or is it if you're eating kind of delicacies like brains and hearts? And I think we don't really know that. Certainly not in New Zealand, we don't know that. And it'd be kind of interesting to look at.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. And one more question: would you own a cat, knowing what you know?
I have 2, because and you know what? Because I had cats long before I knew about toxoplasmosis, so I've probably already been infected. Yeah.
And are you feeling a little bit wound up today?
I'm lost. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Susie Wiles. You see, it's a fascinating topic.
Oh God!
I know it sounded outlandish to begin with.
It did,
but it's.
Our brains are all swelling because of
I know.
But just stop eating your steak rare and you're fine.
Stop eating your steak rare and
stop
you're fine.
having and send your cats away.
Now you're joining Gareth Morgan's camp.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking that. Gareth's going to love this. Another launching pad for Gareth.
I meant to ask about a vaccine. I think there is a human vaccine. But Susie would have known that, and I don't think it's widely used. Do parents get a better deal in the workplace? An interesting discussion, just to close on in one of the Aussie papers. Do employers unfairly favour staff who are married with children over those who are single and or childless, as seems to happen? And is this wrong? It seems that employers do, human nature being what it is. Is there anything wrong with that?
It's a tough one. I had a colleague recently who used to wax lyrical on this and said, all of the government's policies, like workplace policies, are all, stacked in favour of hard-working Kiwi families. What's wrong with the lazy Kiwis who don't have families? Why don't they get a slice of care from their employers and their governments and so forth?
Exactly.
So, which she always used to make with great passion. Yeah, because you do. The family unit gets a bit extra.
Gets protected.
Yeah.
And is that a bad thing, do you think, Claire?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a bad thing, and I'm not actually convinced they get that much of a special deal, perhaps a little bit. But if we want particularly women to stay at work, then they do need some additional support. And, it's very important to therefore do it. So while it might seem unfair to your single male with no kids, if we want women particularly to continue in the workforce, then they do need some additional support and therefore some flexibility to enable that.
Yep, and from the male point of view, if we agree that, role model dads and the presence of dads is actually really important in kids' life, as the research seems to increasingly suggest, then you've got to make room for dads to be able to do that too. So you do actually have to cut some slack for parents to be parents.
Good arguments. I do have time to ask you about one more thing. The Aussie 60 Minutes team, led by the 9 Network reporter Tara Brown, in jail in Lebanon facing a stiff prison sentence. There to document, of course, a mother grabbing back her children, but now charged with kidnapping. Would you have sanctioned, as a television producer, this kind of assignment where you collude with the mother and observe what went on?
I don't know what I don't know, and so I'm always wary about second-guessing people who tell me how to do my job. I'm very wary about that. But from what I know, no, it seems remarkable to send someone in. You're not just covering the story, you're part of the story, you've crossed a line. It seems hugely risky.
Okay. Claire, do you want to have a comment before we go?
Well, it's a really difficult situation where you've got a mother split from her children, so probably they saw it as almost a public service.
Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Dr. Claire Matthews, thank you very much. Very nice to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Jim.
And Tim, always a pleasure to have you in the studio too. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
That is the panel for another day. Thanks, everybody. John Campbell's Checkpoint coming.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, claim, counterclaim, denial, the Antipodes Trust and John Key, the Bahamas and John Shewan, Parliament, tax and trusts, all on for young and old. In this respect today, all of it coming up. Also, she has severe autism. She is a real risk to herself, but her family have modified their home to protect her. Now that home is leaky and they have to move out. But where to and with what? The first of the New Zealanders deported from Australia under tough new immigration laws to have won his appeal against the deportation joins us to tell us he's returning to Australia tomorrow. Begging won't be banned in Wellington. And what exactly is below you when you're flying at 30,000 feet? All of that and more coming up in the next 90 minutes. But first, as always, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The carpet manufacturer Cavalier has announced a major restructure that will potentially cost 65 jobs. It intends closing its Christchurch plant and transferring jobs from its Whanganui operations in favour of a single hub for its yarn spinning operations in Napier. A number of jobs could also move to Whanganui in the proposed restructure. The company told affected staff at its Christchurch and Whanganui plants today. Kay Harefield of First Union says the workers are devastated.
They are bombshelled, they're gutted. It's like just walking into a brick wall. And the reality is, where do we get 40-hour employment in Wanganui?
Kay Harefield says Cavalier employs 113 machinists in Whanganui. A government investigation into the collapse of a Dunedin balcony at a student concert has recommended finding out if similar balconies are at risk. 18 people were injured too seriously when the balcony snapped and fell during the impromptu gig 5 weeks ago. After the collapse, the building minister, Nick Smith, immediately ordered the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to check the building code was up to scratch for balconies. The ministry's report has just been released and confirms there was no problem with the balcony's construction. It collapsed because it was not designed to hold the 18 people on it. The ministry says there may be a problem with the design of thousands of similar balconies, but that needs more testing. Dr. Smith says his message to the public is balconies are not meant as grandstands, but they are safe as long as they have no more than 2 people per square metre. The Labour leader says John Shewan is not the right man to carry out a review into foreign trust rules because of advice he gave to the Bahamas government in 2014. The Prime Minister was asked Mr Shewan and Dom Brash to go to the Bahamas to advise it on introducing a goods and services tax. In Parliament, Andrew Little accused Mr Shewan of advising the Bahamas to exempt financial services from GST to preserve its status as a tax haven. Mr Little asked Mr Key for details about the advice.
Does he not see there is a fundamental problem with appointing a person to review our foreign trust laws who has advised a government on how to protect its tax haven status?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, I can't confirm whether the Bahamas is a tax haven or not. I don't simply know. But I don't think the member would know either.
John Key responding to a question from Andrew Little. John Shewan says he absolutely rejects the accusation their advice about GST had anything to do with the Bahamas' international tax status. A mistrial has been declared in the case of a former Napier councillor accused of drowning his wife in a Canadian lake. The website of a local news outlet, Kamloops This Week, says one juror dissented, meaning the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Peter Beckett is accused of the first-degree murder of his wife, Laura Letts Beckett, who drowned in a British Columbia lake in August 2010. The prosecution in the 4-month trial said the 59-year-old killed his wife out of greed, hoping to cash in on life insurance and accidental death benefits, as well as her teacher's pension. The defence said her death was either accidental or a suicide, pointing to a diary entry in which she said she had suicidal thoughts. Mr Beckett, who was a councillor in Napier between 1998 and 2001, now faces a retrial. The government is changing provisional tax arrangements, giving about 100,000 small businesses the option to pay as they earn rather than having to estimate their profit for the year ahead. The change will apply to businesses with an annual turnover of no more than $5 million from April the 1st, 2018. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says small businesses will be cheering from the rooftops because provisional tax is a pain in the neck for them.
In effect, what will happen from 1 April 2018 is that people will go off to their software system like a Xero or an Intuit or whatever. They'll go out there every 2 months, it'll calculate their tax at exactly what they owe, they'll pay it, and that'll be the end of the story for them.
John Campbell also announced a change to withholding tax, allowing contractors to choose the rate that suits their needs. In sport, the former Auckland's Blues rugby player Curtis Haiu has died after a long battle with cancer. The 31-year-old was diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago. He represented New Zealand at age grade level and played 53 games for the Blues between 2006 and 2011, as well as 76 matches for Auckland. The Crusaders winger Johnny McNichol will head to Wales at the end of this year to play for Llanelli. McNichol, who's playing his 4th season with the Crusaders, has signed a 2.5-year contract with the Scarlets.
There wasn't many cons at the pros, it's a great club. Wayne Pevick, being a Kiwi coach, it's going to be a great transition, easy transition over there. Play a similar brand to us, the Crusaders, they also wear red, so it won't be too much of a change.
Former New Zealand players Regan King and Hadley Parkes are also at the club. The Wanaka free skier Finn Billis has capped a successful season on the international stage by claiming back-to-back wins at United States Snowboard and Free Ski Association's national champs in Colorado. Billis has added the halfpipe title to the slopestyle competition he won yesterday. The competition is one of the largest snowboarding and free skiing competitions in the world, with 2,000 athletes competing in a variety of disciplines. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Russia's environmental history. Doesn't have a great reputation, but isn't President Putin a champion of the wilderness? I'm sure I saw a photo of him riding bareback somewhere. And Motoko Kakabayashi reports from Japan, where she's getting to grips with what it means to be pregnant in that country. And some of her fellow Japanese are getting to grips with not having a job for life. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, occasional rain, brief heavy falls in the north and east tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, showers developing about Coromandel this evening and north of the Harbour Bridge tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, isolated showers clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine. Showers north of Napier clearing tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough, Nelson and Canterbury, fine weather. Otago, mostly fine, occasional showers about Clutha tomorrow and a few reaching Dunedin during the morning. Bulla and Westland, fine, a period of showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Southland and Fiordland, occasional showers, mainly about the coast, but widespread for a time tonight. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's just gone 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. A really busy program tonight. Let's begin with the Prime Minister, who's gone on the offensive about foreign trusts, saying the fact he has a deposit with a law firm specialising in those trusts is not embarrassing in the least. The MP's pecuniary register of interest list John Campbell is having a short-term deposit with Antipodes Trust Group. The government's been responding to criticisms New Zealand's being used by wealthy people as a tax haven through foreign trusts. Mr Key says the deposit is a fund to pay for costs related to the 2 trusts run by his longtime lawyer, Ken Whitney, and the money sits in a trading bank, not in Antipodes Trust Group. He was asked if he'd sought assurances from Mr Whitney he was not connected to Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian law firm featured in the Panama Papers, in any way.
Because he is a specialist, legal trust firm, whatever it is, he is covered by Part 1 of the anti-money laundering rules. So he has the highest level of oversight of any firm in New Zealand. He has 2 yearly audits. He has to know the source of his funds, and he has to declare fully. So he is, in my opinion, has been my lawyer for well over 20 years. I don't deal with people unless they're highly ethical and they do things well. He's changed firms and that might get everyone else excited, but from my point of view, it's just situation normal. The money was going into one of the big trading banks before. It's relatively small amounts, but it's a balance, and it goes into...
We seem to have lost John Key there. He was also asked whether Kenneth Whitney was advertising, whether he wished Kenneth Whitney, his lawyer, was advertising his firm differently.
There's a legitimate place, as I've been saying, for financial services when it comes to foreign trusts. I mean, go back and have a look at Michael Cullen's speech back in 2005-6. He wasn't saying don't establish foreign trusts in New Zealand. He was saying there has to be a proper disclosure regime and a proper way of doing that. But it's a legitimate business. I mean, as you guys were very careful last night, I think, in your coverage of these matters, the reason you were is because you don't want to get your asses sued off you, because actually they are a legitimate business. They're not the devil incarnated. I mean, if a political party wants to say, I'm no longer going to have foreign trusts being allowed to be registered and supported in New Zealand, that's a call they can make. I mean, I think there'd be significant implications of that, but actually he's no different from any other law. I mean, I could go to any law firm you choose and they all pretty much do trust work. He's a bit more interested in it, a bit more specialist. He's always had an interest in trusts. He's the guy that established the JP&B Key Family Trust and introduced me to the people who did my blind trust. But I have to get the best legal advice, otherwise I'll get myself in trouble. But outside of that, nothing new.
John Key, who was also asked if he'd had a discussion with Mr Whitney since the Panama Papers came out.
Yes, I've had a discussion with him to be absolutely 100% sure, because I got to look down the barrel of the camera and make sure that everything's right. But of course, don't forget, if I had a foreign trust, that would have to be declared, and the rules in New Zealand would mean I'd be subject to tax on that, because you're taxed as a settler. And I don't have those things. I have the two trusts I've had. I've always had them for the time I've been Prime Minister. They're completely above board.
So, who is Kenneth Whitney of Antipodes Trust? We know he's John Key's lawyer, has been for many years. John Key just told us that. We also know he's Executive Director of the Antipodes Trust, and that their website tells us, and I quote, "We are a specialist provider of trustee and associated services for foreign trusts using New Zealand as their jurisdiction of choice." The website goes on to say, and again I quote, "New Zealand offers a legislated tax-neutral environment for New Zealand-based trusts." All of that is on the public record and now well known. Also on the public record are the references to Mr Whitney at the Companies Office. A search for Kenneth Gray Whitney under directors and shareholders returns 159 results, although there are some double-ups. But if we look at the list of companies, trusts or entities in which Mr Whitney is or was a co-director alongside people listed offshore, it is impressive. So impressive that in the interests of duration, we've sped it up. Sawyer New Zealand Limited, removed. Director, other directors and former directors from the Netherlands, Singapore, Jersey and Hong Kong. New Concept Trading, registered. Director, the other director from Russia.
Fairfax Capital Limited, ceased director. Current directors from New Zealand, Switzerland and France. Ascot Chase Limited, ceased director. Other current and former directors from New Zealand and Hong Kong.
International Employee Welfare Fund,
removed. Director, other directors from New Zealand and Australia. Montreal Group Limited, removed. Ceased director. Other directors from New Zealand, Australia and Hong Kong.
Rothschild Trust New Zealand Limited, ceased director. Other directors from New Zealand, Switzerland, Singapore, London and 8 from Guernsey. Hindell Holdings Limited,
removed. Director, other director from Hong Kong. International Corporate Trustees Limited, removed. Director, other director from Australia. Global Pensions Limited, removed. Director, other directors from New Zealand and Australia. JML Trust Management, removed. Director, other directors from NZ, Australia and Switzerland.
Tasman Trust Management, removed. Director, other directors from NZ and Hong Kong. First Trustee Holdings Limited, registered. Director, other director from Australia. And International Corporate Trustee Services, removed. Director, other directors New Zealand and Australia, including Kelvin Boyd, with whom Mr Whitney seems often to be a co-director. Checkpoint believes Mr Boyd is the Melbourne Managing Director for Bell Partners, an Australian accountancy firm whose internet site speaks of their expertise in, and I quote, international tax advice. We provide advice to locally and internationally domiciled clients with cross-border structuring, reporting and compliance. All of that available as a matter of public record at the Companies Office. So we asked Mr Whitney if he was available for an interview today to discuss the kind of work he is doing with, well, foreign investors putting money in trusts in New Zealand. Is he doing any? Who's doing it and why? He replied by email he was travelling and unable to speak to us. We're going to stick with tax for a while longer, because in Parliament this afternoon the Labour leader accused the man appointed to review the rules on foreign trusts of giving the Bahamas advice to preserve its status as a tax haven. Andrew Little says this casts doubt on the Prime Minister John Key's judgment in appointing John Shewan, who we're going to talk to in a couple of minutes. Mr Key asked Mr Shewan and the former National Party leader Don Brash to go to the Bahamas in 2014 to advise that country on introducing a goods and services tax. Mr Shewan says they did tender advice about GST, but absolutely rejects the accusation it had anything to do with the Bahamas' international tax status. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Since the review was announced on Monday, both Labour and New Zealand First have been questioning the suitability of Mr Shewan to do the review, mainly because of his close association with the financial services industry. In Parliament today, John Key confirmed Mr Shewan and Dr Brash went to the Bahamas in 2014 to talk about GST. Mr Little asked Mr Key about the details of their advice.
Can he confirm that John Shewan and Don Brash advised the Bahamas that its financial services be zero rated for VAT to protect the offshore services industry of that country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, no, I'm not aware of that level of detail.
Order.
Mr Little then sought leave to table a media report.
From the Bahamas, not widely available, on the advice given by John Shewan and Don Brash to the Bahamas government to the effect that international financial services be treated as zero rated to protect the so-called domestic financial services.
The document's been well and truly described.
After which Mr Little proceeded.
Does he not see there is a fundamental problem with appointing a person to review our foreign trust laws who has advised a government on how to protect its tax haven status?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I can't confirm whether the Bahamas is a tax haven or not. I don't simply know. But I don't think the member would know either.
Andrew Little says in order to preserve public confidence, Mr Key should order a full and formal inquiry into foreign trust rules. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
John Shewan himself joins us on the line now. Are you with us, John?
Yes, I am. Good evening, John.
Good evening. Welcome to the programme. Nice to have you with us. Did you go with Don Brash to the Bahamas to advise on tax policy?
Yes, I did. We were both requested to go up there to advise the Bahamas government on their VAT regime.
Requested by who?
By John Key, by the New Zealand government. The Bahamas Prime Minister had requested John Key for some assistance because they were having difficulty in the Bahamas getting acceptance to the proposed VAT legislation, and we were sent up there to have a look at why there was such resistance and to make recommendations for change.
OK, so VAT is exactly the same as our GST. Well, not exactly the same, but more or less the same, right?
It is exactly the same.
OK. Did you recommend a zero rating for offshore financial services industry in the Bahamas?
No, we did not, and it's very disappointing to hear the statements made today because they're completely and utterly inaccurate.
Sorry, I'm just going to because it's absolutely been said in Parliament that you did. So
yes,
I'm going to so without equivocation, in a very singular way, did you recommend a zero rating?
No. And let me say that apparently what's been said in Parliament today is based on a report from one of the Bahamas newspapers. I have in front of me the section of the report on financial services, and it's very important just to cover the 2 points. Firstly, by the time Don Brash and I arrived in the Bahamas, the draft legislation had been put before the Parliament, and as is the case with most countries, they had proposed to exempt financial services domestically, and the international services would be zero rated. That's standard practice. What we recommended was that the base be broadened, so we recommended a number of other items be brought in. In relation to financial services, we recommended that they retain that exemption for domestic services, but they consider zero rating business-to-business supplies just within the Bahamas, as New Zealand had done a few years earlier.
Okay, so wait a sec. This is confusing now, and it sounds like semantics to me. In other words, is there a zero rating for offshore financial services, for the offshore financial services industry in the Bahamas? And were you part of that? I guess that's the nub of this. Are you using semantics to get around the fact that somehow you were influential over that zero rating?
Absolutely not. As I just said, by the time we got up there, the draft legislation already had in it zero rating for financial services, just as New Zealand does. What we were looking at was, in the context of the overall regime, could they actually expand the base? So, for example,
did they show you the draft legislation? Did they say, what do you think of this?
Yes, they did.
Okay, and so did you sign off on the zero service? Did you say, yeah, that's a good idea, we stand by that?
Well, what we said was that what they were proposing in relation to financial services was entirely consistent with the rest of the world, including New Zealand, and we recommended that they have a look in due course, and we said, and I'll quote what I said here, got it in front of me, the Bahamas government may wish to consider a refinement to financial services provisions at some future point. The regime's complicated, however, and based on the New Zealand experience, is best added to an existing regime when there's more practical experience. Attempting to implement this now would likely delay the implementation of VAT. So we did not recommend the zero rating for offshore financial services. That was already in the legislation. Indeed, it's entirely consistent with the rules in New Zealand, Australia and other countries. So this is complete red herring, a storm in a teacup, and very disappointing. I would have been more than happy to take a call from Mr Little's office to respond rather than people going off on the basis of what would seem to be a completely misleading newspaper article from the Bahamas.
Okay, does this speak to a kind of broader sense coming from some quarters that you are a fox that's been put in charge of the chicken house?
Well, that may be the case, and I've been asked to do a job. I intend to do it, and I've asked that the report be judged on the integrity of the report and its author be judged on the basis of the report.
Which seems to be absolutely fair enough. And if you're an empiricist, you say, OK, wait and see, let's see what John Shewan comes out with. But I guess what people are suggesting is, gosh, this is a man that quite likes zero ratings. This is a man that quite likes financial trust. And can I just ask you a couple of questions about this? Have you ever placed foreign clients in New Zealand-based trusts?
No, I haven't.
Never, not once, in the course of your career as a tax expert with PwC?
I've had no involvement whatsoever with foreign trusts. Just not an area I ever worked in.
Have you ever put New Zealand clients in foreign trusts?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Have you ever been associated in any way with Mossack Fonseca?
No, never heard of them.
So you'd never heard of them prior to the release of the Panama Papers?
No, I hadn't. Had no reason to, John. But can I come back to this allegation by Mr Little, because I really do take it very seriously, because the assertion is that we made recommendations to protect the Bahamas status as a tax haven. This is 100% incorrect, totally wrong. And for such statements to be made without any consultation is, to me, quite alarming. The Bahamas was and still is a low-tax country, a tax haven, that's correct. Our role was actually to enable them to start raising taxes through the implementation of a VAT that worked. The regime was actually in not a good shape when Don Brash and I arrived, and we made substantial recommendations to broaden the base. Ironically, what we did, and this makes what's been said in Parliament today such a joke, we materially increased the level of VAT that will be collected by the Bahamas government by broadening the base, and including key areas such as general insurance and
absolutely,
food, and the whole
but I guess, and this is the point, but you didn't include the offshore financial services industry, right?
No, we did not.
Okay. One final question. Everyone's talking about this Westpac case. Now, I'd only read reports of it, so today I got the judgment of Justice Harrison. So this is Westpac versus Inland Revenue. You know the case. And if we turn to point 564, Mr Shewan recommended that Westpac pay 30 to 40 million annually, even though that sum represented a rate of only 6.5% against the reported profit. So that's in Justice Harrison's judgment from the High Court. Is that true?
Well, it's been taken out of context, but it was part of an overall letter, which I'm limited in terms of what I can say about that, John, but actually what it was saying is, and most tax advisors at that time were saying the same thing, is that there were likely to be changes made to the banking tax rules to tighten the tax base, and that was in fact done. And then these cases came before the courts after that, but the rules had actually already been tightened, so they were historical. And actually, that advice was actually in terms of saying the banks should be paying tax.
And by golly, they had to, right? I mean, there was a huge award made against them. I guess
the entire banking industry was included in that, and there would have been about probably 50 to 80 tax advisors involved. And all I can say is that in the context of 38 years working in the tax area, there are cases that you'll win, there are cases that you will lose. I'm entirely satisfied with my record, and I'm entirely satisfied that I have consistently acted with integrity. I accept that some members of Parliament have had more litigation experience than me, and they may have a better track record, and good luck to them on that. But I absolutely reject any suggestion that I've acted in anything other than a totally professional way, and I do object to some of the very misleading so-called facts, which are complete myths that are now being perpetrated in Parliament.
John Shewan, tax expert, thank you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time. Coming up to 25 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. A family with a severely autistic daughter have nowhere to go after learning the home they purchased 9 years ago is a leaky building. Devora Bush and her husband Richard Barry had 3 children, including 10-year-old Regan, who suffers from severe autism and a disorder called pica, which means she eats anything and needs 24-hour care. Tens of thousands of dollars have been spent modifying the family home with gates and prison glass to keep Regan safe. But now the family will be forced to move out whilst their home is reclad. The families whose home passed council and their own independent inspection are also facing a $250,000 bill for their portion of the recladding. They say they've approached numerous government agencies for assistance, but any temporary accommodation would need to be drastically modified to meet Regan's needs, and nobody has been able to help them. We'll have more on this later in the program, but first Devora Bush showed me around the family home and its extraordinary modifications.
Okay, so this is my daughter's safety bed, and amazingly, because she's about 5'3", she can actually climb out the top.
If you're listening to this rather than watching, imagine a cot for a grown-up.
I can't actually close these at the moment because her anxiety would escalate and she would smash her head against the bars and hurt herself.
In which the sidebars are security fence height. It's a bed, but probably not as you've ever seen one.
She can escape, which is phenomenal sort of physics. I don't know how she does that. All our windows are safety glass and they're double barricaded. And I have a routine every morning where I double check that, because she could fling herself out the window.
This is life. This is the Bush family life, raising Regan.
Regan is considered the top few % of New Zealand high and complex needs. She's severely autistic, which means that she's 10 and a half, but has a mind of a toddler. She's zesty and wonderful, but she has no sense of danger, and she discovers or understands the world through putting things in her mouth, or sampling it, as most toddlers do. She also has pica, which is the biggest problem that we have. She might eat styrofoam. She would eat, if you had Panadol or something, she'd call it lollies and put it in her mouth. Your earrings, change, cough lozenges, anything can become kind of like a death weapon.
In other words, Regan requires constant protection from herself, and their family home has been extensively modified to make it safe for a strong 10-year-old girl who has no sense of danger.
And then the whole kitchen is barricaded, because if Regan sees anything cooking, she wants to reach in and grab it, or she can turn on the oven or the kettle. So this again is prison glass, and she can now open these gates to get into the kitchen.
Devora is standing at a glass and metal bar security wall 1.8 metres high. Beyond it is their family kitchen. It almost defies initial comprehension.
It is. It's prison glass.
This highly modified, essentially unique family residence is also a leaky home.
We have to leave our home for 4 months or so when it's being reclad. It's hard enough to keep our daughter Regan, alive and safe in our normal house with all the modifications, but certainly while it's a building site, it would be impossible. And as most leaky homes have, they've discovered some, toxic mold in the walls. That's safe for us now while the jib is all in place. But whilst that gets, all repaired, they'll have to certainly follow some procedures. So for 4 months, we have to find another place to live, and we'll have to get it modified in all the ways that we do to keep Regan safe.
And where can you possibly go to that replicates that kind of protection for her?
I don't know that anywhere can, and Ree doesn't transition easily. So, the anxiety level of her not being able to be around her things or in the only home that she can remember could really, inhibit, her calmness or her ability to settle, and she could self-harm as she does when she's anxious or try to harm others. It's a huge issue.
Huge and costly. The family, who only bought the home after building reports, moisture testing, council reports, must now repair it, find somewhere else to live, modify that temporary accommodation, keep Regan safe, and bear much of the costs of that themselves. What the Bushes are dealing with isn't really covered by anyone.
We've spoken to different ministers through our local MP. And typically, we've had very polite letters saying, sorry, we can't help you. We as a family, as many do, seem to fall through the cracks. When I found out we had to get out of the house, I tried to get maybe a Housing New Zealand house for 4 months, and there wasn't a show of that. We were just looking at different options because we don't have a lot of options, Yeah, it's a huge hurdle.
The time is 5:30 on Checkpoint. We approached Housing Minister Nick Smith to comment on the Bush case. He says because their home had a warranty, it was signed off by the council. MB and the council will share half the cost of the repairs, but the Bushes will have to find the money to pay for their half. Sam Lottewing is the Associate Health Minister. We approached his office late this afternoon to ask if he could offer any assistance to the family in finding alternative modified accommodation. It really has to be seriously modified. We're awaiting a response. In the meantime, friends have set up a Give a Little account to help the family fund the repair bill, and we will have more on this story after 6 o'clock. Before 6 o'clock, we've got a lot to fit in. A ministry report into the collapse of a balcony at that 660 concert in Dunedin. A former New Zealander sent home from Australia under tough new immigration laws has won his appeal, and he is the first Kiwi to go back. We'll have him, a new phone app that will have you understanding exactly what's below you as you fly, and some new tax rules announced by the Prime Minister today. Very busy half hour ahead, but before all of that, here's Katrina with the headlines.
The carpet manufacturer Cavalier has announced a major restructure that will potentially cost 65 jobs. It intends closing its Christchurch plant and transferring jobs from its Whanganui operations in favour of a single hub for its yarn spinning operations in Napier. Some jobs could also move to Whanganui in the proposed restructure. A government investigation into the collapse of a Dunedin balcony at a student concert has recommended finding out if similar balconies are at risk. 18 people were injured too seriously 5 weeks ago. A report for the building minister confirms there was no problem with the balcony's construction. It collapsed because it was not designed to hold the 18 people on it. The person appointed to review the rules on foreign trusts, John Shewan, says he absolutely rejects the Labour Party's accusation that he went to the Bahamas to give advice on preserving the country's status as a tax haven. Labour's leader Andrew Little says it was incredibly arrogant of the Prime Minister to appoint Mr Shewan, given his visit to the Bahamas in 2014. Mr Shewan says the purpose of the trip was to talk about putting a goods and services tax in place there. The Prime Minister says the fact he has a deposit with a law firm specialising in foreign trusts is not embarrassing in the least because it does not link him to a foreign trust. John Key says the deposit is in a trading bank and not actually with the company his lawyer moved to, Antipodes Trust Group Limited. The Wellington City Council has decided not to take up a suggestion to ban begging in the central city. It's opted for what it's calling a street management approach and will send officers to talk to beggars and refer them to social agencies. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thanks, Katrina. The Prime Minister has unveiled a long-awaited shake-up of the provisional tax system today. The changes will mean about 100,000 small businesses will have the option to pay as they earn income rather than having to estimate their profit for the year ahead. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The pay-as-you-go option means businesses won't have to predict future earnings and instead will be able to work out their tax payments on an ongoing basis during the year. This change would apply to businesses with an annual turnover of less than $5 million and comes into effect on April the 1st, 2018. John Campbell says small businesses will be cheering from the rooftops because provisional tax can be a pain in the neck.
In effect, what will happen from 1 April 2018 is that people will go off to their software system like a Xero or an Intuit or whatever. They'll go out there every 2 months, it'll calculate their tax, exactly what they owe, they'll pay it, and that'll be the end of the story for them.
That sounds simple enough, but Labour's revenue spokesperson Stuart Nash doesn't think so.
What most small businesses want is to be freed from the shackles of provisional tax. This doesn't do that in any way, shape or form. In fact, the way we read it, it looks like companies are actually going to have to fill in tax returns every 2 months.
The chief executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, John Campbell, says it's long been acknowledged the provisional tax regime is really difficult for smaller businesses.
There's a whole variety of different circumstances where the provisional tax regime just made it really almost impossible to be fully compliant. And of course, getting it wrong meant the penalty rates were such that it was quite expensive. So this kind of goes some way to almost eliminating that problem.
There will also be changes to withholding tax on April the 1st next year, allowing contractors to be able to choose the withholding tax rate to suit their needs. The ongoing 1% monthly penalty will also be scrapped then, but immediate penalties and interest charges for late payments will continue to apply. The Green Party's finance spokesperson Julianne Genter says her party campaigned on similar changes in 2011 and questions why the government has taken so long to get with the program.
I suppose the biggest caveat is that it's not going to come into effect until at least 2018, and that's entirely contingent on the IRD's new computer system working. So it remains to be seen. One way to pay for it would actually be for this government to tax multinational corporates who are operating in New Zealand fairly. So I'd like to see the government actually come out a bit harder on the big guys.
The government will also introduce legislation that would allow the disclosure of tax debt information to credit reporting agencies. It would apply to significant income tax and GST debt and to employers' unpaid PAYE, child support, student loan and KiwiSaver deductions from employees' salaries and wages. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
So what do tax experts make of the reforms? Eric Frickberg is doing the business today and joins us from our Wellington studio. Eric, what response has there been?
Well, as you might have heard there's some enthusiasm about it. The Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand organisation says they will simplify tax-paying processes for many businesses, especially so-called SMEs, by reducing compliance and real costs. Now, Business New Zealand is also happy. It says it'll make it much easier for them to pay provisional tax and help increase certainty for business planning. Now, one of the main problems here, John, is that companies have long complained that the situation is so difficult, so complicated, the penalties are so draconian, that they spend a lot of their time reacting defensively and carefully to get their tax planning just right. And they're doing almost more of that than making their companies grow. Now, this is not a small minority of people. There are 110,000 SMEs in the country. The government calls them the backbone of the economy. So it's about time they got a fair break.
OK, so basically the proposals have been welcomed.
Very much so. Now, as you heard in that report from Chris Bramwell, the old system was widely disliked. You had to pay it 3 times a year, the old provisional tax, and you had to calculate it in advance. Now, if you earned less money this year than last year, you might find it hard to pay. If you earned more money, you were penalised for getting the use of that money that you weren't paying. Now, the interest rate charged on that was 9.21%. Now, John, compare that with your mortgage at 5.5%, and you'll see why this was so widely disliked. In fact, loathed would be a better word to use. Now, the government is saying that 78% of taxpayers will no longer be liable for this sort of thing, so there's great enthusiasm for that.
Eric, what happened on the markets today?
The markets, John, the NZX Top 50 index ended on a record high, up 52 points to 6778, and the dollar was trading stronger at 69.37 US cents and 90.13 Australian cents, and that's that.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate it. Eric Frickberg from Wellington. The Building and Housing Minister, Nick Smith, has released his ministry's report into the collapse of a balcony in Dunedin last month, which injured 18, two of them seriously. 18 people were injured when the Castle Street balcony collapsed during the 660 concert. Speaking in Dunedin today, Mr Smith said the building in question was built to code, its timber met the required standards, and it had met the council's code of compliance. The report echoed an earlier one by the Dunedin City Council that said the balcony collapsed because it was overloaded. Mr Smith said his officials had identified two issues as a result of the collapse that would be investigated.
The joists that supported the balcony had a approved technique known as notching, where effectively the timber was cut down by 50 millimetres when it exited the building for the balcony. There are some engineers that have a view that that causes stress fractures in that area where that cut occurs that can make a building more vulnerable. We've commissioned work from the University of Auckland to specifically do analysis on that and whether there are any lessons for the building code around timber construction. My view is that it's not the cause, but whenever these incidents occur, we need to review what technical improvements might be able to be made in the code. The second issue is around the loading. The loading code starts at 1.5 kPa for low-level platforms, decks. When they get up to a height, they go to 2 kPa. If it's a public area in a restaurant, 4 kPa, and for a stadium, 5 kPa. This building did comply and was designed for effectively 2 kPa, which is 2 people per square metre. The issue that officials are going to have a look at is whether there are residential buildings where there are balconies, where there is a risk of a greater concentration of people, whether they are regular Santa parades or whether there are places where there are concerts where we might want to put into the building code provision for a higher level of loading. The most important message from this accident is that buildings should be used for the purpose for which they are intended. There are tens of thousands of balconies around New Zealand, all of which are designed for only 2 people per square metre. And my plea to New Zealanders, if you've got a balcony, think about 2 people per square metre because that's what they're safely designed for. And that ultimately was the reason that this accident occurred and those 18 people were injured.
Nick Smith speaking in Dunedin this afternoon. The Crown says 2 teenagers agreed to have consensual sex with a 4-year-old man before fatally bashing and robbing him. Leonard Naquist-Berquist and Bowen Wallace-Loretz have denied charges of murdering Ihai Gilman-Harris and are on trial at the High Court in Auckland. Mr Naquist-Berquist is giving evidence in his own defence and told the court today that he and Mr Wallace-Loretz had agreed to go to a motel room with Mr Gilman-Harris only to sleep off a night drinking. But the Crown's case is the pair went with Mr Gilman-Harris to beat him and rob him and that they used a bat to hit his head up to 5 times. Our Auckland reporter Edward Gay has been covering the case and he joins us now. Hi Ed, what was the court told today?
Well, Mr Naquist-Berquist said that while drinking in a spot in Kingsland with Mr Gilman-Harris, his friend Mr Wallace-Loretz was offered $1,000 to perform the sex act, and that offer was rejected. And Mr Naquist-Berquist said he felt disappointed and upset by this offer from Mr Gilman-Harris, and he eventually conceded to the Crown Prosecutor David Johnston that it made him really angry. Despite the age gap and the supplying of alcohol and cigarettes, getting lifts from Mr Gilman-Harris, he believed that Mr Gilman-Harris was only after friendship. Now, the Crown Prosecutor, Mr Johnston, took him through a flurry of text messages that followed this offer, 115 text messages between him and Mr Wallace-Loretz. And these messages were sent between the pair while they were driving around in the car around Auckland. Some of them include derogatory words about homosexuals, and they also talk about how they plan to break the legs of Mr Gilman-Harris.
And there was also a mention of getting a bat?
Yeah, that's right. My count, there were 4 text messages that explicitly used the word bat, but Mr Naquist-Berquist said that was a spelling mistake. There was no plan to use a bat, it was a plan to use a bottle. He said that the teenagers were never going to go through with this plan, that it was just stupid talk, as he put it. He also said that they wanted to go to this motel room just to sleep off the drinking, and by the early hours of the morning, no motels were open, so they stopped in this Burger King car park. And this is where the suggestion from the Crown comes in, Mr Johnston suggested that around this time that there was a discussion about the two teenagers having consensual sex with Mr Gilman Harris for money, and that there was an agreement, but Mr Nattrass Berquist denied that ever happened.
Okay, some CCTV stuff has appeared, has it, Edward?
Yeah, that's right. This was played again today in court. Mr Johnston suggested that they went to this motel, the teenagers agreed to go to the motel so they could carry out the robbery in the privacy of the hotel, no CCTV around. But these CCTV images, which we've got, they actually show the pair going into the hotel, and we can play that now.
Actually, I don't think our machine's working.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Well, they show one of the boys, Mr Wallace Loretz, backing into the hotel. The Crown says he's concealing a bat,
right.
But Mr Nattrass Berquist says he was only backing in because he was talking to him about wanting to go to sleep. And this cross-examination is going to continue tomorrow.
Edward Gay, thank you so much, Edward. We appreciate it. Edward Gay has been in the case in the High Court. A former New Zealander sent home from Australia under tough new immigration laws that revoked his visa on character grounds has won an appeal against deportation and is returning to Australia tomorrow. Adam Taylor had served 2.5 years for unlawful wounding, and at the end of his sentence was put in an immigration centre and told he could choose indefinite detention on Christmas Island or deportation to New Zealand. He chose deportation, leaving his partner and 3 children behind, costing him basically everything. He appealed the deportation, won, and tomorrow will become the first of the deportees from New Zealand to return to the country almost all of them call home. Now 24, Adam Taylor had moved to Australia with his family when he was 8. He told me how he'd learned he'd won his appeal to go back.
I was driving and I got the email, so I pulled up and I was like, what is this, you know what I mean? And then I opened it, because I sent him an email 2 days before that asking for an update, and then they sent that email. And I opened it and then I was reading through and I was like, oh, because it said on the top decision on the revocation, and I was like, oh, you know, I was really nervous, obviously. Didn't really want to open it. And then I opened it, read through, and then it just basically said that the ministers decided to revoke any original decision.
To send you back to New Zealand? To send you to New Zealand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's decided to revoke the original decision, and any decision that was made is deemed to have not been made.
And so you are now allowed to go back to Australia on the same status that you were previously.
Exactly. As soon as I go, I get stamped on the 444 visa.
And so you're an Australian again?
Yes.
With 3 Australian kids, right?
Yes.
All born in Australia?
Yeah.
Have they ever been to New Zealand?
No. They're Aboriginal. All of my kids are Aboriginal.
Right. So in fact they couldn't be more Australian?
Yeah.
So what on earth were you doing in New Zealand? Why did you come back?
Because I didn't have a choice, really. Didn't have a choice. They told me that I'll go to Christmas Island if I didn't sign to come back here.
Did you know anyone here?
I have family, but I hadn't seen them for 16 years.
Right, so they weren't close family.
So I don't know them. I came here, I lived in a backpackers. And then I applied for a job, got the job, and that allowed me to travel around New Zealand. Like free rent and all that sort of stuff. That was the best decision I could have made. And then when I came back, I'd saved up some money, so I bought a car and rented a house.
So Adam, you were here to tell me that you think the experience is a bad one, that you think that it takes too long, that you think it's unfair, that you think... But actually, on the face of it, you're quite a good advertisement for how successful it is, because you've done well in New Zealand, you've won your appeal, you're able to go back to Australia. Isn't all of that a good thing?
Yeah, it is a good thing. Like, I don't see coming back here as a bad thing. It's definitely like... It's been a great thing for me. I've enjoyed every bit of it. I've seen the whole country, basically. But if you've got nothing to come back to, unless you're a strong person, you're never going to make it. You're going to turn back to your old ways.
Crime.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you have no family and stuff here, and you're not a strong person, you're not going to make it. Like, I've seen other people just go straight down.
Former detainees who were deported under the Immigration Act.
Gone, like, I know one of them that I tried to help when he come back. He had nothing at all. So basically I was giving him money and stuff, making sure he's all right.
What's happened to him?
I don't know where he is.
But he had no prospects and no hope and no connections and no nothing.
Yeah, he had nothing at all. I was the only person he knew here.
So, you're going to go back?
Yeah.
And you reckon you can start again?
It's going to be tough and a long road, but I'll do it.
Will you?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Because I know I can do anything. I've done it here, I can do it there.
You can?
Yeah, easy.
And what do you say to Peter Dutton for having sent you back to New Zealand? What do you say to the people who gave you the choice of Christmas Island or New Zealand? What do you say to the people who you think in the detention centre were trying to provoke you into an extreme response? What do you say to all of them now?
Well, like, I could say a lot of things to them, but like they've taken my entire life. You know, I have nothing to go back to except my children. You know, like I don't have a house anymore. I don't have a job. I've got nothing at all. You know, I've only got the clothes in my bag. That's it. And it's like I could have stayed there and still had everything I had, but because they've sent me back here, I've got to go back and start my whole life from scratch.
That was Adam Taylor heading back to Australia tomorrow. The company developing the Ruitaniwha Dam says apples and grapes may not end up being the dominant crops grown with water from it. The Hawke's Bay Regional Council's investment company, HBRIC, is developing the dam. Latest estimates put the cost at $900 million, up about $300 million on previous figures. HBRIC commissioned the Butcher report on the economic benefits, and it says with low returns for dairying, it now expects a large increase in water users wanting to grow apples and grapes. Regional Councillor and former Chief Executive of Pipfruit New Zealand, Peter Bevan, says he hasn't been able to find anyone who wants to grow apples on the Ruitaniwha plains. But HBRIC Chief Executive Andrew Newman told our reporter Peter Fowler apples and grapes are just an example of what can be grown.
Now, whether it's absolutely viticulture or it's absolutely pipfruit, it may be today, it may be less than that number, it may be more than that number, or it may be entirely different intensive horticultural crops. And I would suggest that in a 70-year period, it will be quite different crops. So they're just making an assessment.
Nonetheless, so you're trying to build a business case here, and you have to sort of try and work out how the land is going to be used. And
so no, we are not. I'm just pointing out that in this particular case, the Regional Council wants to understand, is this a positive project for the region? Does it bring inwards investment? Does it bring employment? Does it bring increased economic resilience and all those sorts of things? So the Regional Council is using this as part of the broader contextual framework for its own consideration of the project. In terms of HBRIC specifically, we're looking at far more detailed commercial issues, such as, do we have sufficient water contracted to justify it? Can those farmers and irrigators make the deal work financially? And in turn, can we attract investment capital to it that also works financially? So that's our focus.
Right, and for all of that, you need to be able to say, well, we're going to put this amount of land into apples and this amount of land into dairying and those sorts of things. So those assumptions about apples and grapes become quite important, don't they?
No, not in terms of the commercial decision. The actual commercial decision is driven by hard-nosed assessment of whether there's sufficient mixed land use, sufficient customers willing to take that water on a long-term contractual basis at a price that effectively covers the cost of capital.
And at the moment, you had, I think, about 31 million cubic metres of water sold. You've got a Monday deadline. How are you going to get that minimum of 45 million cubic metres that you need?
We will report that to the council, who is our primary shareholder in due course.
From those people that have already signed up and that we know about, what proportion of them are doing apples and grapes?
Well, what I will say is that the blend of land uses is a mix of pastoral irrigation, arable, red meat, and some horticulture. And again, when we report the actual numbers of uptake at that particular point in time, we will identify for the council the blend of land uses.
That was Peter Fowler, our reporter there. The disability advocacy group, the AHC, says schools are demonising children with special needs. The organisation and the Green Party says it's not unusual for schools to illegally stop children attending because they do not have the support they need to deal with their behaviour. The Education Ministry is trying to resolve a situation in the town of Paeroa where local schools won't accept a boy without more help to manage his aggression. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
The 9-year-old was suspended from Miller Avenue School last year and was supposed to return to class in late February. That hasn't happened, and the Education Ministry is working with local schools to get the boy back into education. The Director of Advocacy at the IHC, Trish Grant, says a survey it conducted last year revealed that it's common for schools to refuse or limit a child's attendance.
70% of the families and around the same percentage of school professionals were saying that this was a common experience, and the difficulties they were both agreed on. They didn't have access to the specialist supports to do the job well.
Trish Grant says that's not fair on children.
What then happens is that this child is demonised. This child is perceived as too bad to be in school, when in fact all children have a right to education, all children have a right to reasonable accommodation to get what they need to be in the learning environments.
The Green Party's education spokesperson, Catherine Delahunty, has listened to hundreds of submissions to the Education and Science Select Committee's inquiry into autism and dyslexia in schools. She says it's clear from those submissions that the Paeroa case is not isolated.
There were a number that made reference to their child having been excluded or effectively excluded at some time because there was insufficient support. Many submitters said that they'd never got the full school hours covered by school support. A number of them said they were rung up by the school to come and get their child, so they couldn't go out to work themselves.
It's illegal for schools to stop an enrolled child attending class unless they exclude or expel them. But the president of the Educational Institute, Louise Green, says sometimes principals feel they have no other options.
If the school's put in every resource it can and it's accessed every funding resource it can, then actually what do you do? Because you also have to maintain a safe environment for the other children and staff, and you want the child at school to be actually in a good place to be learning.
Louise Green says the special education system is under-resourced, but the Education Ministry usually provides the extra help schools need for extreme cases. The Ministry says cases of children with very challenging behaviour are exceptional, and it has no evidence that schools commonly stop children from attending. It says it never gives up on any child, and every child has a right to an education. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
And RNZ will have an in-depth report on problems with special education on Insight after the 8 o'clock news on this Sunday morning. Also coming up on RNZ, but much more quickly, World Watch at 6:30 with John Greaves. Tonight, Brazilian authorities prepare for big street protests ahead of the possible impeachment of the president there, and the IMF trims its forecast for global economic growth. That is in 34 minutes. The Wellington City Council is abandoning a suggestion to ban begging in the capital. It's opted for what's called a street management approach, sending officers to talk to beggars and refer them to social agencies. The council heard submissions today from the police and other agencies, with businesses in Newtown calling for a begging ban in their suburb. Tiana Barnes reports.
Newtown businesses pleaded to the Wellington City Council to introduce a begging ban in their area after numerous problems with beggars near the suburb's mall. David Wilcock from the Newtown Business Group told the council it needed to be outlawed in his neighbourhood.
I believe it will have a significant impact to protect our communities, the vulnerable, the old, the young. Even I've been confronted. I've had two young guys have a go at me. I felt threatened. Should we accept this as part of our community? We certainly shouldn't.
He says beggars are causing customers to turn away.
Our businesses are wasting their resources. We're losing money. People are not coming to use our business because they're put off. This is what's happening in the mall particularly. People don't want to be confronted.
Inspector Terry Van Dillen says the police are worried about the public safety, and the council needs to decide how to address beggars who refuse help from social agencies.
The question begs where there'll be members of public think this also. You can put a lot of time and effort into a lot of people. If they don't engage or don't want that time and effort and they carry on doing what they're doing, making members of the community feel unsafe in our city, as a council, as a group, as a police, what are we going to do about it?
He says the public needs to be educated on how to best help those in need.
These people have serious social issues around alcohol or tobacco, whatever it may be, mental health. Giving them money is fueling the fire, you'd say, for some of them. If the person thinks they're hungry and might want a cup of coffee, that's fine. No, buy them food or buy them a coffee. But once you start giving them money, you could well be just adding to their addiction.
The chair of the Community Sport and Recreation Committee, Paul Eagle, says the council came to the right decision.
The decision to not implement a bylaw that bans begging was the right one. What we heard today was that we needed to take a much more hands-on approach. We heard there was no silver bullet. We heard the council couldn't do it alone, and we needed all the help that we could from central government agencies.
He says the council will start a coordinated response with social agencies to look at what causes people to beg. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Tiana Barnes.
We've got about 50 seconds for the news. So Katrina Batten, I'm going to tell people what's on after the news before the news.
Okay.
Excellent.
You're allowed.
Well, I'm not sure if I am. It's unprecedented. Anyway, coming up after 6 o'clock, more manufacturing jobs could be for the CHOP. We're going to find out what's going on at Cavalier. Nowhere to go. This is the plight of a family with a severely autistic daughter. Now, they've modified their home in a really, really major way because they love her and they want to protect her basically from herself. But now the home is leaky and they have to move out. And wherever they go has to have the modifications. Otherwise, it's a disaster. So we're going to look at their plight and look at what possible support there might be for them. And how did an attempt to reach a spin poi world record go? But before all of that, the pips. Never let you down, the pips. It's 6 o'clock. You are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's wonderful to have your company. So all of the things I've just described coming up in the next 30 minutes. But before all of it, a bastion of professionalism as always. Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A government investigation into the collapse of a Dunedin balcony at a student concert has recommended finding out if similar balconies are at risk. 18 people were injured too seriously when the balcony snapped and fell during the impromptu gig 5 weeks ago. Here's our Otago reporter Ian Telfer.
After the collapse, the Building Minister Nick Smith immediately ordered the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to check the building code was up to scratch for balconies. The Ministry's report's just been released and confirms there was no problem with the balcony's construction. It collapsed because it wasn't designed to hold the 18 people on it. The Ministry says there may be a problem with the design of thousands of similar balconies, but that needs more testing. Dr. Smith says his message to the public is balconies are not meant as grandstands, but that they are safe as long as they have no more than 2 people per square metre. In Dunedin, Ian Telfer.
65 jobs are likely to go as the carpet manufacturer Cavalier restructures its operations in 3 cities. The Christchurch felt plant will be closed and jobs will be transferred from its Whanganui operations to a single hub at its yarn spinning factory in Napier. A number of jobs could also move to Whanganui in the proposed restructure. Cavalier Corporation's Chief Executive Paul Alston says the changes follow a review of manufacturing processes. He says it's a tough time for staff, but Cavalier needs to future-proof its business.
The demand for wool and carpet has decreased dramatically over the last decade. We think wool and carpets represent 15% of carpet sales in New Zealand now. 10 years ago it would have been 70%. We think it's probably levelled off at the levels where we are.
Paul Alston says Cavalier remains committed to manufacturing in New Zealand despite the increased demand for synthetic carpets. The tax specialist appointed to review the rules on foreign trusts, John Shewan, says he absolutely rejects the Labour Party's accusation he went to the Bahamas to give advice on preserving the country's status as a tax haven. Labour's leader Andrew Little says it was incredibly arrogant of the Prime Minister to appoint Mr Shewan, given his visit to the Bahamas in 2014. John Shewan says the purpose of the trip was for him and former National leader Dom Brash to talk about putting a goods and services tax in place in the Bahamas.
It had absolutely nothing to do with the Bahamas status as a tax haven. It was all to do with an efficient, first-class VAT system along the lines of New Zealand. New Zealand is recognised as having the best GST system in the world, and that's what we recommend that they implement.
Foreign Trust reviewer John Shewan. The parents of a severely disabled girl say they don't know where to turn for help after discovering the house they extensively modified is a leaky building. Regan Bush, who's 10, needs 24-hour care for her severe autism and a disorder called pica, which means she eats anything she comes across. Her parents, Devora Bush and Richard Barry, have modified the Auckland house they bought 9 years ago to accommodate her needs, but discovered recently it was leaky. Ms Bush says the family needs to move out for 4 months while the house is reclad, but there's nowhere safe for Regan to go without extensive alterations. She says she's written to several government ministers, but has received replies saying they can't help the family. The Wellington City Council won't be banning beggars from the central city. Instead, it adopted what it's called a street management approach and will send staff to talk to the beggars and refer them to social agencies. The council heard submissions today from the police and other agencies, with businesses in Newtown calling for a ban in their suburb. The chair of the Community Sport and Recreation Committee, Paul Eagle, says its decision not to introduce a bylaw that bans begging is the right one. He says the council will start a coordinated response with social agencies to look at what causes people to beg. A 72-year-old woman who got lost in an Arizona forest after running out of petrol has been rescued after 9 days, surviving on pond water and plants. Sharon Rogers, who used sticks and rocks to fashion a help plea in a clearing, was suffering from exposure, but was reported to be in a fair condition when she and her dog were found by a helicopter. The authorities say she'd been missing since March the 31st, when she left her Tucson home to travel to Phoenix to see her grandchildren. Mrs Rogers told her rescuers she got lost, ran out of fuel and depleted the charge on her hybrid vehicle. Then she became disoriented when she climbed several ridges trying to get cell phone reception. To sport, Auckland Rugby is mourning the death of former Blues lock Curtis Haiu, who has died after a 5-year battle with cancer. He was 31. Haiu was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, Ewing's sarcoma, in his ribs in 2011, which ended his rugby career. The former heavyweight world champion Larry Holmes is in Joseph Parker's corner, predicting the New Zealand boxer will become world champion. Parker fights France's Carlos Takam in an IBF eliminator next month in Auckland. The winner gets the mandatory position to challenge Britain's Anthony Joshua for his IBF belt. Holmes says the 24-year-old Parker has time on his side, claiming he might not peak for another 10 years. He's also impressed with Parker's jab, saying it reminded him of himself and offered some advice for his upcoming bout.
Throw that jab, slap him, don't punch him, slap him with the jab, slap it. And when it's a good time to throw that jab with a punch and knock him out and knock him down.
Good advice there, former world heavyweight boxing champion Larry Holmes. Auckland City have won their second match at the Oceania Football Championship in North Harbour, edging out the Papua New Guinea side, the Lae City Dwellers, 2-1. And the New Zealand men's hockey team must beat India tonight if they're to have any chance of making the final at the Sultan Azlan Shah Cup in Malaysia. The defending champions are currently third on the table behind Australia and India. That's the news.
The Mash Mash.
Given the issues that have developed over these mesh parks, whether there should be a mandatory requirement, independent testing certification.
Working visas.
In the past, there have been too many employers who have reached out to get migrant labour when there's workers prepared to work nearby.
Runaway house prices.
Property speculation is still rampant, and still the government refuses to roll up its sleeves and actually build houses.
Airing the issues on Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, match-fixing expert Declan Hill on the fallout from the Panama Papers for the sports world. And after 10, Yorkshire farmer, shepherdess, best-selling author and mother of 8, Amanda Owen. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow now. Northland occasional rain, brief heavy falls in the north and east tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, showers developing about Coromandel this evening and north of the Harbour Bridge tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, also Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Isolated showers clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine. Showers north of Napier clearing tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Marlborough, Nelson and Canterbury, fine weather. Otago, mostly fine, occasional showers about Clutha tomorrow and a few reaching Dunedin during the morning. Bulla and Westland, fine, a period of showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Southland and Fiordland, occasional showers mainly about the coast but widespread for a time tonight. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. This is a breaking story this afternoon, and we're going to look at it more. More than 60 jobs could be axed at the carpet manufacturer Cavalier. The company intends closing its Christchurch plant and transferring jobs from its Whanganui operations in favour of a single hub for its yarn spinning operations in Napier. Kay Harefield is the first union organiser for Whanganui Taranaki. She's on the line now. Kay, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Is 60 jobs going to be lost overall? Is that what you understand?
There are possible 68 job losses.
Okay, and where will they be lost from?
From the plant itself as a woolen spinning mill. So my understanding is that there is machinery coming from the Christchurch plant, which is the felt division, that will create 40 jobs. So out of that 68, there is a possibility that 40 people can remain on under the new machinery technology that they're introducing.
Okay, so it may be 28 jobs or somewhere in that region that will be lost overall?
Could possibly. Depends whether we have workers that are able to relocate to Napier, because that's an option.
Yeah,
and there are 40 jobs going there.
Yeah.
But the reality for most people is it's not that simple just to pick up your families and relocate.
No, and we're talking relocating from Whanganui to Napier, so there's probably a price differential too, isn't there? Napier would be more expensive, is my guess.
I would certainly imagine.
Yeah, okay. Jobs are precious, aren't they? And these sorts of jobs, which are both specialised and particular in terms of your ability to transfer them, are really precious.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a multi-skilled workforce. They are very reliable. They're very committed and loyal. So as you can appreciate, it was a massive bombshell for the majority of people that heard the announcement this afternoon.
Hey, when you say bombshell, had there simply been no warning, no kind of prefiguring that this might be about to happen?
Well, I mean, late last year, there was some restructuring done from their original current shift structure. So they attempted to bring things in a streamline, if you like, and there was 6 redundancies around November last year. But unfortunately, from what we've heard today in the announcement, that hasn't achieved what everybody was hopeful for.
Kay Harefield from the First Union, thank you very much indeed for joining us with that news about the redundancies at carpet manufacturer Cavalier. It's 6:11. A family with a severely autistic daughter have nowhere to go after learning the home they purchased 9 years ago is a leaky building. Now, Devora Bush and her husband Richard Barry have 3 children. One of them is 10-year-old Regan. She has very severe autism, along with a disorder called pica, which means she basically eats anything and everything. Regan needs 24-hour care, but she needs way more than that. Tens of thousands of dollars have been spent modifying the family home with gates and even prison glass to keep Regan safe. But now the family will be forced to move out while the home is reclad. Devora Bush says the family has nowhere to go. Alternative accommodation would need to be drastically modified to meet Regan's needs. She showed me around their extraordinary family home.
Okay, so this is my daughter's safety bed, and amazingly, because she's about 5'3", she can actually climb out the top.
If you're listening to this rather than watching, imagine a cot for a grown-up.
I can't actually close these at the moment because her anxiety would escalate and she would smash her head against the bars and hurt herself.
In which the sidebars are security fence height. It's a bed, but probably not as you've ever seen one.
She can escape, which is phenomenal sort of physics. I don't know how she does that. All our windows are safety glass and they're double barricaded. And I have a routine every morning where I double check that, because she could fling herself out the window.
This is life. This is the Bush family life, raising Regan.
Regan is considered the top few % of New Zealand high and complex needs. She's severely autistic, which means that she's 10 and a half, but has a mind of a toddler. She's zesty and wonderful, but she has no sense of danger, and she discovers or understands the world through putting things in her mouth, or sampling it, as most toddlers do. She also has pica, which is the biggest problem that we have. She might eat styrofoam. She would eat, if you had Panadol or something, she'd call it lollies and put it in her mouth. Your earrings, change, cough lozenges, anything can become kind of like a death weapon. Some of the troubles that we've had have been quite surprising. Recently, she put lots of little bits of a napkin down her throat, and because, you have moisture in her throat, it wadded up and she was choking. So you just have to constantly be vigilant and constantly have her at arm's length.
In other words, Regan requires constant protection from herself, and their family home has been extensively modified to make it safe for a strong 10-year-old girl who has no sense of danger.
And then the whole kitchen is barricaded, because if Regan sees anything cooking, she wants to reach in and grab it, or she can turn on the oven or the kettle. So this again is prison glass, and she can now open these gates to get into the kitchen.
Devora is standing at a glass and metal bar security wall 1.8 metres high. Beyond it is their family kitchen. It almost defies initial comprehension.
It is. It's prison glass. And, her twin sister can't fetch herself a glass of water. I can let her into the kitchen and her sister and I can cook together. But, it limits the other children's independence. Hey?
But this is life, and this is a close and loving family determined to make the highly unusual work for Regan. She could be in permanent state care, but no one wants that.
She came into this world as she is. She didn't relinquish her human rights because she was born disabled. She's part of our family, and it's our job as her parents, as all parents, to give your children the best life that you can. It's just a kind of different life, and how we navigate that for her is different. But she and our other two children, they came into the world, and they have the right to be safe and loved and protected and happy and joyous. And she has the right to do that with her family. If she were in care, it would be about $250,000 on the taxpayer's buck a year to house her.
But she's not. Regan is at home, and home works, or did work, because now the family have to move out. This highly modified, essentially unique family residence is also a leaky home.
We have to leave our home for 4 months or so when it's being reclad. It's hard enough to keep our daughter Regan, alive and safe in our normal house with all the modifications, but certainly while it's a building site, it would be impossible. And as most leaky homes have, they've discovered some, toxic mold in the walls. That's safe for us now while the jib is all in place. But whilst that gets, all repaired, they'll have to certainly follow some procedures. So for 4 months, we have to find another place to live, and we'll have to get it modified in all the ways that we do to keep Regan safe.
And where can you possibly go to that replicates that kind of protection for her?
I don't know that anywhere can, and Ree doesn't transition easily. So, the anxiety level of her not being able to be around her things or in the only home that she can remember could really, inhibit, her calmness or her ability to settle, and she could self-harm as she does when she's anxious or try to harm others. It's a huge issue.
Huge and costly. The family, who only bought the home after building reports, moisture testing, council reports, must now repair it, find somewhere else to live, modify that temporary accommodation, keep Regan safe, and bear much of the costs of that themselves. What the Bushes are dealing with isn't really covered by anyone.
We've spoken to different ministers through our local MP. And typically, we've had very polite letters saying, sorry, we can't help you. We as a family, as many do, seem to fall through the cracks. When I found out we had to get out of the house, I tried to get maybe a Housing New Zealand house for 4 months, and there wasn't a show of that. We were just looking at different options because we don't have a lot of options, Yeah, it's a huge hurdle. We're no better or worse than all the other families in this country who are suffering leaky homes. We're in extreme face of it because we have our beautiful girl, and that gives some limits to what our options are. But so we're kind of the extreme face of how leaky home is impacting on thousands of people here.
It is impacting on thousands of people, and as a journalist I've told that story many, many times, but I've never met somebody less well able to go somewhere else. And that means that the impact on you is really disproportionate, isn't it? Because you need somewhere where will be safe. And other than your home, that place almost appears not to exist.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it does exist. And, I've had some comments from people, well, why not put Ree in care while you do the house and you guys could find a place? But, Regan won't even sleep if she can't see that I'm next to her, or she does not settle well. Her anxiety becomes hugely escalated. Settling her with someone new can take a year. So you cannot scaffold that kind of change into 4 months. Plus, I would never relinquish my daughter. We're doing all of this to keep our family intact, and that's our right. We are a family, and we are overcoming or trying to overcome enormous hurdles to keep intact. And we shouldn't be having this amount of drama just to remain as we are.
And so a family that was somehow coping now finds themselves unable to cope. Where do they go with Regan? How do they make it safe for her? How do they pay for it? The life they'd somehow made work has been broken by their leaky home. The family that has given everything up to care for Regan now finds they may not even be able to do that. External care is simply not an option for them. But what is?
She needs 24-hour care, so that would be 3 workers doing 8-hour shifts each at minimum wage, works out to about $160,000, and then her bed and, her room in a residential environment, her food, it could be even more than that. And with her young age and her pica, she'd be, and being a little girl, she'd be really vulnerable. And if you don't check on her every 3 minutes, my girl can die in the safest of environments. So if you don't love her with your soul, I don't know that people would be as dedicated or diligent about creating that type of care and protection that she is entitled to.
When did you and your husband last go to the movies or celebrate a wedding anniversary at a restaurant or something just nice and ordinary?
I do not know. I really don't know. Multiple years, Yeah. A long time ago, John.
Tavora Bush, who was doing a wonderful job looking after her daughter. We approached Housing Minister Nick Smith to comment on the Bushes' case. He says because their home had a warranty, it was signed off by the council. MB and the council will share half the cost of the repairs, but the Bushes will have to find the money to pay for their half. Sam Lotuinga is the Associate Health Minister. We approached his office late this afternoon to ask if he could offer any assistance to the family in finding alternative modified accommodation for them while the house is being basically reclad, rebuilt. We're awaiting a response. In the meantime, friends have set up a Give a Little account to help the family fund their repair bill. It's 23 minutes past 6. It's just 6 months until the local government elections, but in Christchurch, nobody has put their hand up to run for mayor. hell of a job, that one. Yesterday, the current Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, told local media she was feeling the strain of the job and was torn about whether she'd stand for a second term. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Colin Young.
In an interview with News Talk ZB, Leanne Dalzell said she had lost the fun of life and was weighing up whether she still had the energy to run again. She declined RNZ's request for an interview, but a friend of Miss Dalzell's and the former Christchurch Mayor, Gary Moore, says the city needs her to stand again. He says the Mayor has led sweeping changes designed to make the formerly dysfunctional council more responsive to the city's needs, but the job is not yet finished.
Christchurch has experienced something that very few cities experience, and it's important. Consistency and stability happens at the elected level to bring the bureaucracy into a place where it's properly accountable to the ratepayers of Christchurch.
But Mr Moore says he can understand why the Mayor isn't rushing to throw her hat in the ring for a second term.
I worked 90 to 120 hours a week as Mayor for 9 years, and I'd say Leanne would be doing that plus, and I did not have the complication she has of the external forces that meddle. So it's probably the hardest mayoral job in New Zealand.
A former mayoral candidate and cabinet colleague of Miss Dalzell's, Jim Anderton, says the scale of the problems when she took office 3 years ago were greater than anything ever experienced before by a mayor in New Zealand.
When you're faced with these sort of situations which have never happened before, there's no model to follow. You've got to just take one step at a time. And Leanne's been good at that. And I think her preparation in the whole range of political and community affairs at a national and local level prepared her for it. So we were very lucky to have her at that time.
Jim Anderton says after the tumultuous period experienced under Bob Parker's leadership, the city now requires a period of continuity.
The really hard yards have been done. It's still going to be difficult, but she's got a grip on it now, and I think at least another 3 years would be very good for the city. Whether it's good for her is another matter.
The head of Canterbury University's politics department, Bronwyn Hayward, says the next most obvious candidate for mayor after Leanne Dalzell is the first-term councillor and former investment banker, Raf Manji. He's ruled out standing, which could signal that Miss Dalzell will stand, because Mr Manji has previously said he'll only consider running if Miss Dalzell does not. Bronwyn Hayward says the two complement each other.
I hope Leanne Dalzell and Raf Manji's continue because I think the team is very good and they kind of unite the city really in a way that's quite progressive and helpful. I think we need to do a lot of listening to different viewpoints.
Miss Hayward says she suspects too much has been made of Leanne Dalzell's fatigue in the job.
Everybody, I think, in Christchurch has times where they're completely exhausted and also feeling quite creative and energised. I think it's good that leaders in the civic eye just actually say sometimes, gosh, this is tough.
Bronwyn Hayward says the Dalzell-Manji combination is only now starting to find new ways of funding the rebuild of the city, and it would be good if they could keep that ball rolling. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Conan Young.
Thanks, Colin. We're going to end the programme tonight by travelling northwest from Christchurch to Nelson, and just after 5 o'clock, hundreds of people gathered in Victory Square in Nelson to attempt to break a world record. More than 250 people were needed to spin poi for at least 2 minutes. Our reporter Tracy Neal was there and joins us now. Tracy, are you there?
I am, John. I'm here, and very sad to say that we failed by just 4 people.
Oh no, what happened?
There was a rather deflated cheer when it was announced that they'd fallen short, and that part of the reason was that several people had dropped their poi, and the record required a constant spinning for 2 minutes of 251 people. 247 people turned out in a lovely, glorious Nelson evening, and the word is, though, that they're going to have another crack at it later in the year.
Well, I think they should. So I just saw there's some pictures. You sent some pictures up. There's a couple of local coppers having a go, Tracy. They didn't drop their poi, did they?
I think they may have got them tangled at one point. I did see a rather shambolic rehearsal, but they joined in on the spirit really well and had a great time.
I am observing the weather in Nelson. By golly, it looks lovely. Autumn's beautiful there, isn't it? So whose idea was this?
Well, this is the idea of the Victory Community Centre and led by Gail Petch, who's quite a mainstay of this organisation in Nelson. Victory Community, I have to add, was named Community of the Year, New Zealand's inaugural Community of the Year in 2010. And the Victory Community Centre, which this event was designed to support, it was a fundraiser for the centre. It is a hub of Victory community that offers recreational and social cultural support and health and well-being drop-in centre for the community. And this was the whole idea, to fundraise for that centre, which is in a bit of a crisis.
Okay, so you missed out by 4 poi, which seems really mean. So they're going to have another crack?
Yeah, Gail Petch, she was a little bit disappointed afterwards, but still happy at the turnout, and she said they were too close to let it go now, and they will have another go at later in the year.
Okay, well, we look forward to you reporting on the successful conclusion of that particular event. Thanks, Tracy. Tracy Neal live from Nelson with some beautiful photos of people doing the poi over the top. I can't believe, says Bob Lawton, that it's not possible to find a builder who can perform the remediation one wall, one room at a time, so the bushes can stay in their home. I wonder if they've considered that. I think the mould is toxic, so I'm not sure if that's an issue, but good point, Bob. And I'm confused. Last night, says Karen, John Key said if he didn't ask a foreign trust expert to look into foreign trusts, it would be pointless. Tonight, his chosen expert said he had no experience with such trusts. Yes, tax and all of this is rather confusing. We looked at it at some length tonight. I'm sure we'll have another go tomorrow. Do join us then at 5, but thank you for being with us tonight. That is Checkpoint for this evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A government investigation into the collapse of a Dunedin balcony at a student concert has recommended finding out if similar balconies are at risk. 65 jobs are to go as the carpet manufacturer Cavalier restructures its operations in 3 cities. John Shewan, who's reviewing the rules on foreign trusts, is rejecting Labour's accusation he went to the Bahamas to give advice on its status as a tax haven. And Wellington's council won't ban beggars from the CBD. Our next news and weather's at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, a new way to choose the next UN Secretary-General. Some Syrians prepared to vote in parliamentary elections shortly, and members of Led Zeppelin to stand trial